Welcome to another episode of Beyond the Sermon. I'm Mat Hotho, the Director of Production and Online Engagement.
And I'm Magrey, deVega, the Senior Pastor.
So if you haven't gone and listened to Magrey's sermon yet, I highly encourage you to do that before watching this conversation. Go back, you can find it on our YouTube channel. So Magrey, that sermon that you just preached, it was one of the most deeply personal sermons I've ever heard you preach. And I've been listening to you preach for about 9 years now. What inspired you to give that sermon today when you did?
Well, thank you for that. It is definitely one of my most deeply personal sermons that I've ever preached. And the reason for that felt right when we put this worship series together last year over the summer. Mm-hmm. We knew that this entire worship series was going to connect the cross, not just in terms of theological, intellectual, conceptual stuff, but deeply personal stuff that really impacts the way we relate to others and the way we solve the problems of the world. And when it comes to race relations, we would be doing it a disservice if we simply talked about racial reconciliation in the abstract, in the conceptual, just to treat it as an intellectual enterprise, when in fact, race relations is a matter of personhood and identity. It's not the only matter of personhood and identity, because none of us are monolithic. We are all intersectional. We are more than just our race. We are more than just our gender. But when it comes to this country and our nation's original sin, it is the widest gulf. It is the deepest divide. It is the thing that's in our air. It is the thing that we inhale and exhale. It is our own work on needing to work on the racism within our hearts and to be anti-racist. So when we put this series together, we knew like 2 weeks ago when Sally preached on nonviolence, she was going to talk about a deeply personal story. When Bernie talked about forgiveness, he was going to touch on some deeply personal things. And his response to that sermon, just like Sally's, from a lot of people, are about how personal this work is. So it just made sense for me to talk about my personal story, my personal experience with race.
And what I hear you saying is this came out of a desire to understand more of how the cross works vertically and horizontally.
Right.
And yet I can't help but catch the valences, the harmonics with what's going on in our culture today.
Yeah.
Right? When you shared that story about the guy who told you, minorities sit in the back.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just like, that's ringing in my ears.
Yeah.
Right? I think that we don't want to believe that stuff still happens. We want to say, oh, that was the 70s, that was the 80s, that was the 90s, but the truth is we're confronted with the very real racism that exists in our culture today.
Yeah.
Even you working with the phrase diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? DEI, and just unpacking that and playing with its connection with the imago Dei was, I think it's going to be really bothersome for a lot of people, really prickly.
Sure. Well, the reality is that everything that happens in the world is a faint echo of what we carry every day in our own personal life. There's that whole phrase, what's personal is universal. And it's also true that what's universal is also personal. So when we see headlines, when we hear of shocking news that is nationwide or worldwide, part of what happens is something resonates deep within our own personal experience, what I refer to as the inner child in my sermon. There is that inner child that hears what's happening in the world today, and it brings back faint echoes of what our inner child has been dealing with since the very beginning of our lives. And so, for example, with the death of George Floyd back in 2020, something happened there that was not just a headline, and it was not just the story of one man or one police force or one system in one part of the country. Something happened there that deeply resonated with the inner child in all of us, in so many of us. And I think about George Floyd because, if I may, just this past week, my friend Brett and I were in Minneapolis, and just on a spontaneous whim, he said to me as we're driving in the car, "Isn't the George Floyd Memorial right here in Minneapolis?" I didn't know. He didn't quite know. And lo and behold, we drove up to the very intersection where he was killed by that officer. And what's been erected there is a marvelous, remarkable, spontaneous series of monuments erected to remember him, and not just him, but the story of race in our country, the story of young Black men, and to some degree, the inner child that's in each of us. And so I'd just like to read one of the signs that was put in the George Floyd Memorial that was written by a woman named Miss Mary. And this is powerful. This speaks on behalf of the plight of young Black men, young Black women, and really touches deeply, personally, at the inner fears that we all need to share on behalf of others. This is what she says. For every Black man and woman who called out to their mothers because heaven was approaching faster than the paramedics, I now see the privilege, not in my circumstances, but in the breath I still breathe. Because the driver's license I carry reads more like an obituary when found in the hands of the police. I mean, this was not just a news story. This touched on the deepest part of what it means to be human for all of us, but particularly for the parts of our human community who feel lost and confused and trapped. And because of that, our inner child also should feel lost and confused and trapped. So, like every Sunday in this series, this has to be deeply personal.
Yeah. I think that ties back to what you've reminded us and called us towards for years now, of empathy, curiosity, and humility. I think those three values, but especially the one of empathy and curiosity, that desire to be in touch with our inner child, but so that we can be empathetic towards what other people in the world are going through.
Right.
To read a poem like that and to not say, well, that's mine, to claim that that's my experience necessarily, but to be like, God, that is awful.
Right.
That has to be the experience that other people have to experience.
Right. And it's, you talk about DEI being brutally politicized nowadays. I can't believe that so has the word empathy.
Oh my God. Yeah.
It's not just a Christian virtue. It's a human virtue.
Yeah.
To look outside yourself, beyond the selfish, arrogant, narrow-mindedness that is our penchant, that's our default mode. Empathy brings us out of that to teach us how to be human with one another. And so I can't even believe that has been politicized.
Yeah. Well, let's turn to something a little bit more hopeful.
Okay.
You mentioned your daughters.
Yes.
And how they have taught you a lot about, or kind of reflected back on you, some things that you've shared with them and raised them. And what have you learned from them, just as they've grown up and you've gotten to have adult conversations with them about growing up as a minority?
I'm very grateful for them, and I'm very grateful for the times that they grew up in, because they, unlike me, went to a school where they were not the only non-white kids in their class, not even in any of their individual classes. And they are growing up in a world, despite the current political turmoil of our time, they are growing up in a world where it is a given that diversity is a good thing. And what's great about them is that they teach me how to speak about things. So they were the first ones to instruct me on the use of pronouns as a proper way of dignifying the gender identity and expression of people that I know. I'm not good at it. I'm working hard at it. And they gently correct me on that. They teach me all these things about a better kind of world where diversity, equity, and inclusion is a given. It should be a given. And so when I talk about how delighted I am and surprised and dismayed that they tell me, Dad, why didn't you teach us more Tagalog? It unpacks for me a lot of reason why, a lot of reminder as to why I had to subsume my own ethnic heritage in order to fit in with the dominant culture. And it's always just a prompt of repentance and confession, not shame. I mean, the last thing we want to do when we're doing this work is be more shameful of who we are. There's a way of doing repentance and confession that doesn't double down on the shame, but just is a reminder to do better. And so I do regret, I think it's okay to regret, the fact that I don't have more Tagalog to teach them. But I love the fact that they want to learn, because it reminds me that they have a better set of values in the world that they're growing up in than the one that I had to grow up against in my world.
Yeah. So one final question as we're wrapping up. If someone's watching this and is looking for something to do practically
Yeah.
to maybe put into practice what you've shared in your sermon and in this Beyond the Sermon, what's something they can do?
So the work of anti-racism is a deeply personal work. First, to work on the racism within your own heart, and then to be proactive in anti-racism. And we're all in a different place in that journey. So because of those two things, that it's deeply personal and that we're all in a different pace and a different journey, what I'm going to suggest is that you enter into a relationship with someone, to have a trusted conversation with someone. Now, it's easy for me. The default for me would be to recommend a bunch of books. The default for me would be to recommend a program. I did recommend Voices for Justice and Nehemiah Action. I hope that you'll be a part of that. But this is not simply a matter of plugging into a right process or reading the right books. There are a lot of good books out there that I've read. But I would suggest that as you do this deeply personal work, reach out. I'm going to speak on behalf of Sally and Bernie and Justin and others on this staff, that if you want to do this work, reach out to us. Let us have a conversation with you. Let's see where you are, what your struggles are, where you are personally and interpersonally. And then we can talk to you about the right book or the right process or the right program. The last thing we want to do when we're talking about a problem where we categorize and cookie cutter people into different compartments is to treat it by programmatically putting you in a cookie cutter approach to work on something that is very deeply personal. So find someone you can trust to talk to. Reach out to us, and then we'll go from there. We'll see what works best for where you are on this beautiful, difficult, soul-polishing journey.
Yeah, I like that. I like that word, Magrey, that ending kind of message, because if you're listening to this and you're feeling any sense of shame, if you're feeling any sense of guilt or anything like that, please know that we're not imparting that on you. We don't want you to feel those things. That's not why we're doing this work. It's to open up the opportunity for a conversation. It's to open up the opportunity for more empathy, curiosity, and humility in your own life. And so reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you more about this journey that we've been on, and have you join us on that journey. So thanks so much for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Sermon. We'll see you next time.